Greetings, folks. 3, 2, 1, and we're sort of live. Right then, I'll read through this. So I'm very much going with the Jungian idea of the introverting functions are subjective, the extroverting functions are empirical. So here we go. I will be getting into empathy and the subjectivity. So, subjective feeling. So, yes, two forms of subjectivity. The first form of subjectivity, like FE, requires a percept to react to. So, percept is an object of the mind. So, any stimulus which is perceived. Here, FI is about the person's subjective, i.e. idiosyncratic, particularly to the individual, idiosyncratic feeling response to a percept, a phenomenon. Second form of subjectivity, unlike FE, can be percept independent. Here, FI does not even require a percept in the present sensory experience or in a memory of past sensory experience. Example, FI imaginative. See the FI imaginative section. NB, all imaginative subfunctions, FI imaginative, TI imaginative, NI imaginative, SI imaginative, can be percept independent because it's of the imagination. Right. Imagine writing a novel and really going in towards the center of a character. Now for the how. Now some might say, Ben, how do you know that empathy is an important feature of FI? Well, what I would say is, look at those types which have, those two types which have FI as its weakest, or their weakest function. I'm looking at you, EXTPs, FI allergic. They're not good at empathy. So, see the FE graphic or previous video, the FE video, for how this differs from FE introjection of another person's feeling state via that person's affect display, especially facial expression and tone of voice. So there's sort of those empirical elements you can sort of test, take a survey, get people to watch a certain piece of acting, and then you go towards sort of like the empirical details. Oh, this person is upset, or we can tell that, or more subtly, oh, this person is based on the situation. And situation is massively important in terms of reading into what the feelings are in a given situation. And there's something called the Kuleshov effect, where what someone did, I think the Russian Kuleshov, is that he took the same facial expression, the same shot, but he put it in a different order. So a different sort of context. And based on the context, people read different emotions into the facial expression based on the context. And it was just a neutral expression, but the context, and people were reading in. So context is a big part of it, and how somebody reads a context. Because really getting into subjectivity now. So for example, someone may see a scene or see a particular life event, and there's the context that they read of that event, but then there's the context of that person. This is where you can get lots of subjectivity when, for example, you have people criticizing a form of art from, look at all the different ways that Shakespeare can be interpreted. And someone could have, there could be a particular context that is very personal to somebody, and that level of subjectivity and relatability to it can affect how it's read, just with the subjectivity. But moving on. So again, the introjection of another person's feeling state via that person's affect display. So, for example, there are art books which go through, this is the expression for disgust, this is the expression for this and this. And interestingly enough, very likely INTP Scott McCloud talked about how certain emotions are combinations of other ones. Let me start getting into feelings. Like, is a feeling a combination of emotions, which is what Vanderhoot thought. And some, it's been described as a feeling as a subjective experience of an emotion. Now, I'm not like some socionics people that would say FE is emotion and FI is feeling. Not like that. I'm like Vanderhoot in that emotion is in sensation. So, for example, you're on a roller coaster. The emotion, the exhilaration, or the fear is bound up with the sensory reaction. And I can sort of prove this because there's a circuit in the brain where there's sort of two circuits where the sensory input goes to the thalamus and then to the neocortex. The neocortices, there's two of those. The posh part of the brain, neo for new. And there's also a quicker circuit where it goes to the limbic system, the amygdala in particular, before it goes to the posh part of the brain. So there's an emotional reaction before it goes. So you usually have those emotions related to the 4 Fs. Fight, flee, feed, or how can I put it cleanly? Fornicate, I suppose. Right. So, Robert McKee, yeah. So, yes, this is how I use empathy. I use this definition of empathy. It's sort of like coming from a writing point of view, which again is part of context. When I'm looking at something, it's the context of what is my knowledge base. And my knowledge base is going to be different from somebody else. Other people are going to know stuff I have no idea. And it's like, oh, Ben, did you know that relates to that? No, because I didn't know about that. See my NE video. In order to make connections between A and B, you have to know what B is. So page 141 to 142 of his book Story, Robert McKee wrote about empathy. Empathetic means like me. Deep within the protagonist, the audience recognizes a certain shared humanity. We empathize for very personal, if not egocentric reasons. When we identify with the protagonist and his desires in life, we are in fact rooting for our own desires in life. Through empathy, the vicarious linking of ourselves to a fictional human being, we test and stretch our humanity. So I related to the George Costanza character because of the lead 6. Flipping fly buzzing around. A very light buzz. So, and then because of that connection, so there's empathy in that sense. Sympathy, it's more like you can have sympathy for a dog in pain rather than empathy. And I use that definition. And this again goes toward the point I continually make about thinking not being external. That if we were to ask 100 people, what does empathy mean? I bet they all have slightly different definitions. So it is a case of words do need to be reinterpreted. And part of that reinterpretation is context. Right. And a message can be recontextualized. Right. Anyway, getting back to FI. So relatability. If someone is a male, oh, here we go. Preempted myself. If someone is a male INTJ Enneagram 6 watching Judge Costanza, who's a Knit 6 character based on Larry David, his writer, which is why George was much better written when Larry David was actually the showrunner or co-showrunner. He would likely relate to that character better than if the watcher were a male ESTP E8. Despite being FI allergic, female ESTP watchers would relate more to ESTP hotshot pilot Kara Starbuck Thrace in Battlestar Galactica Mark II, played flawlessly, and I mean flawlessly, and I'm tough on acting, flawlessly by Katie Sackhoff. Right. Yeah, there are other kinds of empathy, G-cognitive via theory of mind outside of typology. Yeah, like, so, yeah. So with, say, ESTP in particular, I've heard Jeff talk about this, and also Kersey. I'll quote Kersey, because he wrote about how the ESTP can be thought to have good empathy on the surface. But what it is it's due to the ESTP's ability to read body language very well. So I need to get to this bit. Here we go. So this is where you get to where ESTP can be good at FE. Promoters are so engaging with people. So this is like when the ESTP is like maybe creative subtype and very much in that role of the con artist. And Kersey writes that, when they're unhealthy, like con artist. Promoters are so engaging with people that they might seem to possess an unusual amount of empathy, when in fact this is not the case. Rather, they are uncanny at reading people's faces and observing their body language, hypersensitive to the tiniest non-verbal cues that give away the other person's attitudes. ESTPs keep their eyes on their audience, ever on the lookout for signs of assent or dissent, and with nerves of steel, they will use their information to achieve the ends they have in mind. So, and then winning people over this kind of brinkmanship. But the point there is that's going towards FE, whereas FI, you got that personal connection and relatability and empathy, and it's beyond that. And yes, it gets a little bit blurry between the introjection of the affect display, the facial expression, the tone of voice, and sort of feeling that inside. And then the sort of specific subjective reactions to maybe someone who's gone through something similar that you've gone through, and there's a little bit of subjectivity and connection and identification there, that there you get a little bit more subjective. So this is the only function that I've done pros and cons for, and I've made this rather extreme when I get to the cons of FI, but I would argue that these pros of FI are extremely important and extremely useful. So, for example, a recent addition, because there are a lot of cons to FI, but healthy high FI is correlated with high intrapersonal IQ. which is also somewhat correlated with maturity. I would argue that. Do you think Donald Trump has a lot of self-knowledge? Because this also correlates with ego defenses. So here we go. This is the key bit there. Healthy high FI. Because you could have unhealthy high FI. So for example, say you've got an Enneagram 4 fixated person who is, say, middle-aged and very much got the ego defenses there about being exceptional when this person is not. And that's going to be a problem. That person's not going to have great intrapersonal IQ because the ego is getting in the way. And Carl Jung wrote about that, where he said, somebody can't empathize if someone is egocentric. So this is like, so when FI is high quality FI that's not, that's healthy FI from a person that's not egocentric, then that can be, and then you've got very high quality intrapersonal intelligence maturity that's with that FI. Yeah, the ego is not a problem. Lots of sort of self-knowledge, and that kind of person can write very good characters in novels. Now, 2, FI allergic. So this is when FI is almost completely absent or like binary in, and even then it's only on in certain circumstances and it's quickly forgotten about. I mean, Victor Glenker wrote about ENTP. Remorse does not eat on him for long, something like that. FI allergic is a serious deficit in ESTP and ENTP. They are bad at core FI and all its subfunctions. So it's a serious deficit in that. So in other words, because they have good points to those two types, ESTP and ENTP, and I've mentioned those. But the flaw, what is bad about ESTP, the weakness of ESTP and the weakness of ENTP, that weakness is due to, either you could say excesses of EP, but in terms of character, those flaws, shows you how important FI is. It's like that saying, you'll miss me when I'm gone. Well, FI is gone in those two, and then you miss it. So that shows how important FI is. But like I said, the best FI is FI that's not egocentric, right? And egocentric FI is not much use. In fact, egocentric FI could almost be as bad as FI allergic, because it gets in the way of empathy, true empathy. So, for example, you can have someone with bad FI where someone goes around stating that they are a very empathetic person, but if someone has politics that they don't like, then suddenly they project all kinds of evil motives onto such a person because of political differences. And it's like, and then another FP might look at that person and go, calm down, dear. I used to think like that. 20 years later, you know, it's not that simple. Yeah, so it's not a case of all FPs are these brilliant high intrapersonal IQ people. They absolutely can be. When there's no ego and there's maturity there, then they can be the highest in that area of intrapersonal intelligence. So I'm putting some big pluses in here. It's conscience. That is a massive tick for FI, conscience. Gut feeling, conscience, and sensitivity. That's some big praise for FI. Empathy related to identification or bond with the other person. Good for arts, especially acting and character writing. 5, determines appropriateness because determines the status of each relationship. FE can also determine, but this is to contrast it. This is where socionics gets it wrong. Socionics thinks that all interpersonal distance is determined by FI. No. FE can also do that. Can also determine appropriateness, but via the attention to social norms rather than from an internal subjective feeling. So, for example, when you're at Seinfeld, many of the conversations in Seinfeld are about what is and is not appropriate in sort of dating behavior and that lot. And that's all external stuff. Like, that's all sort of like FE stuff. Well, you should, it's like comedy of manners. No, you should do this, you should do that. Because there's a lack of, they don't know from internally what the right thing is to do. It's like, what are the rules? It's like they're not going off internal feeling of what is right. They're going off external rules. So there is that FE component to it, that external empirical part to it. How's it empirical, Ben? Well, go look at this book. Someone's written about it, or someone has a blog about these are the social conventions. Yeah. Right then, so now we get on to the cons of FI. Here we go. Yes. I will state that much of this is a criticism of the assertive subfunction of it. Now, I think that all the functions, I have a problem with the assertive subfunction of nearly all the functions. Like TI can get on his high horse. You want an example of TI assertive going down the route, about a dodgy route, is like classical socionics, information socionics, where it gets very rigid, and Victor criticizes it as a logic of uniform structure. And so it's quite funny that he put the bitterness his definition of TI minus is a criticism of classical socionics, and he says that that's TI plus rather, and TI minus is his own socionics, more flexible. Right, here we go. So this is how STPs and NTPs, especially ESTP and ENTP, might say about when FI at its worst: judgmental, self-righteous, oversensitive, overpersonalizes, subjective emo. Noticeably higher pronoun density of I and my. But having said that, you can get a lot of like ESTPs with a high pronoun density. So that can maybe come from a different angle and overlap. Prone to projection. Yes, this counters the empathetic ability. Again, this is like getting into like FI assertive, the bad part of FI assertive. Lack of maybe maturity with this kind of FI. Self-centered, because all about how people, percepts, or things make FI wheelhouse types, that's FPs, personally feel. Close-minded after judgments made. And then here, suppresses cold reasoning, e.g. hard for FI wheelhouse types to understand Peter Schiff. Yeah. So, for example, if you were to say to an FP, hey, would you want to listen here to Peter Schiff where he explains the downsides to a minimum wage? And it's like, no. Okay. And so, so you want people with rich parents to be able to send their children to be interns and not get paid at all, because they can't afford to pay the people. They could either pay them nothing, or they could pay them minimum wage. But because the minimum wage is there, they can't pay them anything. So it's easier for people from rich parents to actually intern in these good jobs because the parents subsidize them. Right. And also the pulling the ladder up in terms, another arguments he would talk about in those entry level jobs. Right. And also Peter Schiff would say, well, why don't make the minimum wage $50 an hour? What would happen then? Anyway, so that's just the kind of examples of TI kind of arguments from TPs that FPs don't like in the main, because they're coming from a sort of an ethical point of view. Right. And then you could counter them. Well, why do you think why do you think the cost of living is so high? Context. Anyway, I won't get onto that. That's to do with monetary policy and the size of governments. Right. Oh yes, FI values. Yeah, FI values tend to be temperament related. Yeah, Guardian FI versus Idealist FI. For example, an ESFJ resembler with very artisan parents and siblings, the value of responsibility would likely come mainly from within. So not an FE value in that situation. It's coming from within. It's coming from the temperament. The value of responsibility would likely come mainly from within, specifically from the ESFJs, the FESX, the extrovert and feeling type with subsidiary instinct, guardian temperament, and that value might be at odds with her artisan parents and siblings. It might be at odds with the subculture the person is in. So for that specific ESFJ, here's her value of responsibility is FI related, and it comes from within. So FI values shared by all FPs. Individuality. Yeah, so this can be valuing one's individuality and the individuality of others. Be consistent. One-to-one deep connection. That is important to FPs. ESTPs and ENTPs are not interested in one-to-one deep connection. Well, especially when younger. This can vary, and there can be development depending on how a significant other relationship is. Yeah, but they're not feeling it as deeply as the FPs or what they talk about. An STP might say something like, "Isn't it enough that I feel it?" That might be more ISTP. Soul type, Battlestar Galactica Mark II. Authenticity important to them. Integrity. So which is congruency of values. My word is my bond. I'm not an EXTP. Honesty and character. Right then. So now we get to subfunctions. FI assertive. Subjective, i.e. idiosyncratic ethics. I'm right. And being prepared to stay true to self, value in play, authenticity, even if it means going against the social grain. Due to their idealist temperament, NFPs tend to be consensus-oriented, may wish others to get with the progressive program. However, outside of politics, they can be as individualistic as artisans. Yeah. A little contradiction there with the idealist temperament, where you get a lot of they want sort of group focus and people to work together, but then it's like there's not that consistency that you get from, say, a libertarian point of view, which is very TI. A libertarian politics is very TI, very much the value on consistency. Yeah. And what you can get with NFPs is it's like, oh, so you want your freedom in this area, but you want the government to tell you what people to do in that area, because that doesn't apply to you. So, right. Due to their artisan temperament, SFPs tend to be individualist. Kersey temperament matters. Yeah. It's just general trends. There's not that many NFP libertarians, but maybe they've got the sense not to reveal it. Older ones. I think I know one. I'm not going to reveal names. It comes to something when you have to stay in the closet as a libertarian. No one would be applauding that when the libertarian comes out. No round of applause for them. Oh, you're so brave. Well, you would be. Anyhow, FI imaginative. Art, especially putting oneself into the center of a character as that character, not as yourself in that person's shoes, but as that character. Feeling as that character feels. Now, this can take, for me, I'll tell you about my writing process. So with some characters, so with the Wilma character just came from within me. So that didn't require a lot of work. And with the Wilma character, she's in nearly every scene in the stage play, and the stage play works out to about 3 hours. So I know the Wilma character, and she's like ENTP, collaborator, rational, and libertarian politics. And with some of the other characters, and I was able to get the Rena character. I had to change the Rena character from the stage play to the DramCon because she's like 20 years younger. And I added particular backstory stuff and upbringing stuff to make the character more interesting because, ESFJ. It's like you can't just have ESFJ good egg. You need to have some interesting sort of context. Now, with 3 characters, with the Laura character, I spent about 4 months on that character. Again, 4 months on the Tell character and 4 months on the Tamsy character. And that ability to get to a point where the character writes itself because the character's point of view so well, to such an extent, for example, that 50 opinions of that character on, say, ideas, percepts, various events, various people, what the opinion from that person is, what all the politics are from a particular character on say 30 political positions. What does that character think about those? What are the various attitudes? What is all of that kind of stuff? And so I would say, but for me, I can't compare to anybody else, but for me, it took me a point to get to that point. And then when you can do that and be that character, then you can write that character, act at the desk. And if, for example, the character's really upset, then I'm upset. If the character's crying, then I'm crying. But it takes me a while to get to that point. Now, it might be something with me with the 6, the 4, and the 1, which I think are related to have some access to FI that's beyond the normal INTP, because the 6 has got a lot of anxiety, so it's in touch with its feelings more than the 5, which cuts itself off from the feelings. You've got the 4, which is very much about identity. There's a lot of like some FI themes in 4. Then you've got the sort of the FI assertiveness with the 1. So the 6, 4, and the 1 gives me a bit more access to FI, I think. Although we shall see. The proof of pudding is in the eating, and the eating of Wilma's housemates will be late next year. Right, and you'll then see, and you'll be able to judge. Yeah, then Ben's okay with that fight or not. Or what does he think? He's got himself fooled. Now, how was he able to persuade people to be in this? I'll give him points for FE and get him to persuade him, but I'll take an FI points off because he's not got these characters right. Right. Anyhow, FI harmonizing. Ethics of relations. So taking that, I took that term from classical socionics. So yes, psychological distance and connection. So again, this is, you're not using FE data. FE data would be, okay, if you're with someone and you're getting all of the affect display and it's like, oh, she's really into me, right? And it's all coming, it's like, that's all the FE data, right? It's like, oh, she's really into me. But rather than arms crossed, legs away, FE data is saying, no, turn around and leave. So there's FE data there. So it's like, you know when someone's into you or when someone is very much not into you based on FE data and just paying attention. And so that will give you an idea of psychological distance from the FE stuff if you're paying attention and not get the ego in the way. Read the situation. So that'd be FE, some SE and FE together. But with the connection part, there's a kind of subjectivity there in terms of, oh, this person is like me, this person, we're on the same wavelength. Kind of, oh, this person has an idea what it's like to me, like this kind of, there's a sort of sense of connection and bond. That's different. That's more subjective. Values and subjective feelings, right? And then values and subjective feelings in harmony. I got that from Leon Sal, where I used to think it was impossible for an FI Dom to be an Enneagram 9 because I thought, okay, Enneagram 9 is very much other focused. I'm thinking, yeah, but FI is not. FI is very subjective. I thought, does not compute. I went into like assertive TI, does not compute. FI Dom cannot be Enneagram 9. And then Leon Sam was talking about, but he balances the values from other people with his own. I see. So that helped with this subfunction description. See the FI Dom Enneagram 9, firmly fixated person who fears loss and separation. Such a person likely uses a lot of H subfunctions, and also to probably keep it within. Responsive accommodators in Kersey. Yeah. So, right. So those are all the accommodators. INFP. Sorry, first one's ISFP, then INFP, then ISFJ, then INTP. One from each temperament: reserved and informing. You can get Enneagram 9 INTPs. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, yeah. So yeah, more likely to use the harmonizing subfunctions. Yeah. So an Enneagram 9 ESFJ is more likely to use harmonizing FE. Be more about harmony. An ESFJ with a stronger 1 is more likely to use sort of assertive FE and assert norms. And it's like when I did the FE video last week, and it was about the example of the ESFJ shaming her neighbor, publicly shaming her neighbor on Facebook with a post which was there to the world, public. Harmony, Enneagram 6, Enneagram 9 fixated folks will have this as an aim to be congruent with their feelings. No dissonance. Interesting. I think so. Because the Enneagram 6 doesn't like being ambivalent, doesn't like the doubt. So that's me asserting that. The Enneagram 6 and Enneagram 9 fixated folks will have this as an aim to be congruent in their feelings. Yes, because incongruence in feelings causes anxiety in 6. I think maybe other types would maybe ignore it. They ignore the incongruency in the incongruence in feelings. Wow. And be overlaps with NEH, integrating different points of view. Right then. So there you go. And like I said, I'll go back to all these lovely positives of FI. So it doesn't look like an FI bash. Interpersonal IQ, conscience, that's an important one. Shows how important it is. If you look at ESTP and ENTP, you'll miss me when I'm gone. Empathy, yeah. So it has, and again, there the importance of especially FI imaginative in writing. That's Douglas Adams. That's in the interview where in the NE video where I go on about the infinite probability generator, and Melvin Bragg says to Douglas Adams, Arthur Dent's a bit of a stereotype, isn't he? And he says, "Oh yes, of course. I'm not interested in characters. I'm interested in ideas." That's what Douglas Adams said. So, and that was in 1992. And remember, he was born in 1952. So, a 40-year-old ENTP said, "Oh, I'm not interested in characters. I'm interested in the ideas." Peter Cook, also ENTP, collaborator rational, said he wasn't very good at being I think it was one episode of being a talk show host, and he said one of the problems he had was I wasn't interested in the guests. Right, so again, like ENTP is more interested in the ideas that a person gives forth rather than the actual person itself. Outside of a deep romantic relationship, there can always be development. These are individuation patterns after all. So I will stop now. Now I'm going to try and do the thing. Here we go. 3, 2, 1. There you go.